At last, we're live. We're live. I know that quite a number of people will join us from various platforms, like I said. So, good afternoon, everyone. It is 3:09 p.m. in Lagos, Nigeria. I'm streaming live from Lagos, Nigeria. My name is Adedoyin Adebayo. Okay, I'm the host of the Performance Tools LinkedIn Live. Essentially, this is where I bring in thought leaders, where we have conversation around a particular topic. And in the last 1 year, I've brought in wonderful speakers. And today I have with me here Dorie Clark. Dorie Clark, good afternoon. It's afternoon here in Lagos anyway. So that's why I'm
Yes.
saying good afternoon.
Well, thank you. And I'll say good afternoon to you and good morning from where I am in New York City. Adedoyin, it's wonderful to speak with you.
Yeah, it's wonderful to speak with you too, Dory. Thank you so much. I mean, thank you for your time. I know that to bring you on this platform, it's not easy. We've been having this conversation for a while now, and I thank you so much for your time. Eventually, so let me just do a brief introduction, and I know you will do a better one by the time I bring you in. Essentially, so Dorie Clark is a recognized expert. She's one of the top 50 business thinkers in the world, as named by Thinkers 50. Let me also congratulate you, Dorie. I mean, just a few days ago, you are also still awarded as one of the top 50 business thinkers in the world. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Congratulations. Yeah. So Dorie is also recognized as one of the number one communication coach in the world by the Marshall Goldsmith Leading Global Coaches Awards. She's a consultant. She's a keynote speaker, and she teaches executive education at Duke's University's Fuqua School of Business and Columbia Business School. Dorie is a prolific writer. I mean, just go on Harvard Business Review, type Dorie Clark, and you will see trailer loads of articles written by Dorie Clark. She also writes for Time Magazine, Entrepreneurial Magazine, Talent Development Magazine, and a host of other magazines like that. So, Gary, thank you so much for honoring my invitation. So, just a way of introduction. So, you may also want to introduce yourself to connect with our listeners, our viewers, anywhere they are around the world before we take a deep dive into this conversation today. Thank you, Dory.
Well, thank you. You did such a great job, Adedoyin. There's not much else to add. I'll just say the one thing I'll mention is I have a new book. It came out about 2 months ago, and it's called The
Yeah.
Long Game: How to Be a Long-Term Thinker in a Short-Term World. So that's where a lot of my research has been lately, is focused on
Yeah.
this question of long-term strategic thinking and how to
Yeah.
do it better.
Yeah, thank you. I'm sure we'll talk about that briefly. But just for our listeners, wherever you may be, please go ahead and let's know where you're watching from. Um, Tell us your location, any part of the world where you're watching from. So, Dory, let's go. Even though I know about the long game, but I just want us to go a little bit back to talk about the entrepreneurial you, because I know that here in Nigeria and in any other part of the world, professionals basically, uh, want to be able to monetize their skills, essentially. So that's why I mean that particular topic piqued my interest, and fortunately, it was the title of the book before this one. So that's why I said, okay, let's have a conversation around that. So,
Yes.
if just as a way of starting, maybe I should ask this question just about you. So, how did you start the journey? Um, just let's have a bit, a bit into how you started this journey. I mean, before you became a recognized expert.
Yeah, well, thank you for asking. So I started working for myself in 2006. So it's been about a 15-year journey for me in terms of building my business and working to build my reputation in that business. In the earliest days, the background that I came out of, I had been a journalist, I had been a nonprofit executive director, I had worked in politics. And so I had, good training in certain things, but one thing that I definitely did not have was a lucrative network of business contacts. I had never worked in a corporation. I was not plugged in. And so I realized very early on that in order to build my business successfully, I would have to do a couple of things. The first is I would need to gather enough social proof and reputational credibility so that people in the corporate world felt comfortable hiring me and were interested in hiring me. And secondly, I needed to meet those people in the first place. I didn't know them and I wasn't sure how I could get to know them. So I really embarked upon a strategy over the better part of a decade to try to be thoughtful and understand more about what it actually took to become a recognized expert in your field. What were the ingredients? What were the things you could do that if you were essentially starting from scratch, that you could build up the reputation and credibility such that people would want to seek you out. So that was the journey that I went on.
Hmm, hmm. Well, thank you. I mean, you talked about social proof. Would you want to talk more? Would you want to talk more about how you built your social proof?
Yeah, absolutely. So, social proof is a term that often gets thrown around in the world of psychology in particular. And broadly speaking, it just refers to your sort of perceived credibility. The way that I like to think of it is like, what is your credibility at a glance? Because the truth is, we are all incredibly busy. And as a result, people just do not have the time. They don't have the bandwidth. They don't have the cognitive capacity to actually think about each individual person that they meet and be like, is that person credible? Let me think about that. Let me really ponder that. Like, that's the last thing they have time for. What you need to do is to be able to telegraph to people rapidly, okay, this is a person worth listening to. So, how can you do it? And ultimately, I think the best and most helpful shortcut that I can suggest is to affiliate yourself as best you can with brands that are already known and trusted by those people. It becomes a kind of heuristic shortcut. And so it could involve things like writing for publications that they already read or have heard of. It could be that your client list is names of companies that they know. It could be that you have degrees from educational institutions they respect. It could be that you've been quoted in newspapers or magazines that they've heard of. It could be that you're a leader of professional associations that are respected in your field. Any of those things, teaching, guest lecturing at universities, but it's about really coming up with your own campaign to acquire that social proof. I think sometimes, people don't focus on it and then they're like, well, it'll just happen over time. And, it might happen over time, but you can actually speed up the process
The
if you make a
process.
concerted effort to seek out that social proof.
I mean, that's a great one. Most especially now that the advent of social media, it's also quite easy to build that social proof, basically. But one thing I'd like us to talk about here now is the idea that the world that we live in right now. A lot of professionals talk about entrepreneurial self. The question is, why should one care about the idea around looking at yourself as an entrepreneur?
Yeah, that's certainly an important question and definitely one I've thought about a lot. You're kind enough to refer to my most recent book,
Book,
Entrepreneurial
yeah.
You, and the subtitle is Monetize Your Expertise, Create multiple income streams and thrive. And that is it begins to get at why I think it's so important. For me, a formative experience was about 20 years ago. I was working in my very first job after I finished graduate school as a newspaper reporter. And I ended up, after about a year on the job, getting laid off. And the thing about layoffs is that oftentimes, and this was the case here, there's no warning. It's not like they tip you off. It's like,
Exactly.
yeah, one day you have a job, and then the next day you do not have a job,
You do not
and
have.
it's very alarming. And so it made me realize that really the only true security, the only true job security and career security that we have comes from actually creating multiple revenue streams. So even for people who do have a day job, I actually suggest creating a little something on the side for yourself as a way of hedging your bets. And certainly, if you're an entrepreneur, it's a great idea to have multiple clients, to have multiple offerings, because if things get disrupted for whatever reason, you are able to have other things to fall back on. Now, I'm curious, Adedoyin, I would love to hear a little bit more about your journey to your present role, and how you're spending your time. How did you get interested in the sort of
Yeah.
coaching and organizational development world?
Yeah, thank you. So I also worked in the bank, some years ago. And when I left the bank, what I wanted to do, or what I was interested in doing, was consulting. So prior to leaving the bank, I was already into some sort of training where I'll go out to, to train some of my, I was in sales basically then. I'll go out to train some of my clients, for free. I was doing it for free. But when I went into consulting, or when I got into consulting, it wasn't difficult for me. In fact, my first client in consulting was a customer that I was managing in the bank. So I walked up to him and I told him, he's a CEO of an oil and gas company. And I walked up to him and told him that, I'm in consulting now. And the next thing he told me was that, oh, really? Can you help us train people over a period of time? And that was more like a proof for me. That was how I got into consulting. And for about
Yes.
10 years ago, that's basically what I've been doing. Talent development, organizational development, basically, and providing some sort of coaching, career coaching and executive coaching to client, basically here in Nigeria. So that's
That's
just a
great.
little bit about, that's just a little bit about me. Yeah,
I love it.
thank
Awesome.
you. Yeah. So now, we have a lot of professionals who are excellent. They're good. Just like just like I have explained, or just like I have said right now. I realized that I built those skills, but the challenging thing for me then was how to monetize the skill. So how would you advise, or what sort of advice or methodology do you have for someone who happens to be a professional, who work 9 to 5, and who at the same time wants to toe the path of entrepreneurship? So, what would you say in this regard?
Yeah. Well, in the book Entrepreneurial You, I actually share a few stories that I hope might be helpful for this, because I think so often a problem that I perceive in our culture is that often we quote unquote tell the story of entrepreneurship as very much all or nothing. The common story goes, oh, well, they were working in their job and they didn't like their job, so they just gave it up and quit, and they risked it all, and then they started their business, and oh, it was successful. Well, that's great, but that is pretty risky, and it's especially risky if you're someone who has financial commitments, whether it's a family, whether it's student loan debt, or whatever it is. A
I know.
rational person might actually hear that story and say, well, God, I can't afford to do that. That seems terrifying. And I don't think they'd be wrong. And so I think it's really important to make sure that we're actually accurately telling the story, which is, yeah, you can do that. You can risk it all, but frankly, I'd rather not. I think that there's better and safer ways of doing it. And what I would suggest instead for almost anybody, if you have entrepreneurial ambitions, it is better to keep your day job, create something on the side, test it, validate it, and only when it has sufficient traction to actually devote more time to it. So, I mean, just as an example, there is a guy that I profile in Entrepreneurial You named Bozy Dar, who to this day is a successful executive in the biotech space. And he actually just, basically nights and weekends started experimenting with different entrepreneurial ventures he was interested in. He wanted at first to create an app, and he did. And it turns out that app was not successful. But in the process, he managed to learn an enormous amount because, the things that you're forced to learn when you're creating a project, marketing it, launching it, it made him very savvy about sales and marketing. And he was able to apply those skills to his own job, which even though the app didn't work, he ended up getting promoted much faster at work because everybody's like, wow, you're so knowledgeable. You have, such a great sense of how to market and launch things. So it can help you in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, that's interesting. Um, you profile a quite number of people. Seth Godin, in the book, you profile Tom Peters. Apparently, Tom Peters is also going to be a guest on this show. I mean, sometimes next year. You
Right.
profile also David Allen, a quite number of known names and all of that. What is the common theme that you found out that made them, stand out over the years? I mean, they've been known for a very long time. They've built that skill. They built that expertise. What is that common theme that you found out in interviewing all these people, all these great people?
Yeah, well, thank you for asking the question, Adedoyin. So it's true. You're actually, yeah, you're diving into the whole oeuvre here because these are guys that I feature in my book
Exactly.
previous to that. Stand out, and stand out is really essentially about how do you become a thought leader? How do you become a recognized expert in your field? And what I came to realize over the years, because I did study this process very closely, we talked earlier about social proof. But what I realized is that in order to become a recognized expert, there's fundamentally three components to doing that. One of them is social proof, because you do need to telegraph to people when you're meeting them that you are credible, you are worth listening to. But there's two other elements that I think often get overlooked, and you need to have all three working together. So
Together.
besides social proof, one is content creation. And the reason that that's so important is that ultimately, for most of us, the place that we start out is that the people around us, the people that we've worked with directly, they know we're great, which is fantastic, but there's only so many people you can work with, right? So if you want your ideas to travel further, if you want strangers eventually to know that your ideas are good, you have to find a way to make them transmissible. And so content creation, whether that is through having a live stream show like you do, whether it is through writing books or articles or giving speeches, whatever it is, but somehow you need to share your ideas more widely so that content can get circulated and shared. So that's number one. Social proof is number two. And the third is your network, because even if you have the best ideas in the world, if people aren't hearing them, then it doesn't do too much good, right? You don't want to be the tree falling in the forest. You need people to amplify it. So building a robust network of people that know you, have heard of you, respect your work, and are willing and able to amplify your work becomes the essential additional component here.
Wow, thank you so much for that. I picked those three things, and I'm sure A lot of our people also are picking it. Let's just go back and see a few. So there is someone, Oluwakemi Akinobi. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for for being part of this. Then also Titus Aronilewa from Niger State. I mean, that's like if a northern part of Nigeria. Thank you also for being part of this as well. Okay, I like us to talk about these three things are very essential. You talked about the social building, the social proof, also sharing content, developing content, and also your network. Now, if we narrow it down to monetization, someone who is a professional and who has built these skills and also who is also looking forward to to start something, would you advise someone who is so interested in 9 to 5 to also begin to look out from within? I mean, so someone is working in an organization now, and at the same time, he wants to start building his expertise so that he can monetize it. What do you say in that regard?
Yeah. So if someone is looking to build their expertise and they're still working in a day job, that's actually a great position to be in because it first of all just takes the pressure off, right? You don't have to be thinking about, oh my gosh, how am I going to make money? How am I going to pay the bills? Because you have the steady job. And so that enables you to make smarter long-term choices. So depending, it's going to be a little bit different for everyone's circumstance, but I would say there's a few things. So number one is that you can certainly use that time to begin to educate yourself and build your expertise in a certain area. So if you've decided, I mean, I'm making this up, that you want to become an expert in the future of artificial intelligence, well, while you have that day job, this can be the perfect learning lab for you. You can be reading all the books. You can be attending all the webinars. You can be, attaining a certain level of mastery in the field so that you are knowledgeable and conversant so that when you ultimately do go out on your own, if that's what you want to do, you are able to be, somebody who speaks with a great deal of knowledge. So that Oh, we had a cat sighting there. That was
Oh.
exciting. So it's always extra points when we get a cat sighting. But in addition to that, for many professionals, they might feel a little bit stymied because if they, for instance, are working inside of a company, they might say, well, I can't do a lot on social media, for instance, because then it'll look weird with my company. They won't like it. That's actually okay. It's not like you have to dive into social media or public facing things immediately. You could also, for instance, start building your network. That's actually a great thing to do while you're still working in your day job because it's not like your company can stop you from meeting people or having coffee with people. And so you can start to build up those relationships again so that they are ready and those people know who you are and hopefully like and respect you by the time you do sort of emerge.
Thank you, Dory. I know you are you're a proponent of multiple offerings. I mean, I read in one of your articles or blog or something that from time to time, maybe after a year, you must develop a new sort of offering or something like that. I mean, I remember, which also pretty much explains what you do. I mean, you have coaching, online course. I mean, loads of that. But is this not against the concept of also so rather than develop so many of those offerings, why not stick to one?
Yeah.
Why not stick to one?
It's a good question, and you're right, of course, that there's risks with any approach, and so the risk of concentrating your efforts too much, of course, is that you make yourself vulnerable if the market changes. If for some
Mm,
reason
mm,
technology changes, or there's a new competitor, or whatever. If people don't want your thing and you only have one thing, well, that's a problem.
mm,
But it's also true, certainly, that if you have 100 things,
mm.
that you are not able to devote sufficient energy to them. You might not be able to market them properly. You might
Exactly.
not be able
Mm,
to really concentrate. So the question, I think, for all things is, how do you navigate that? How do you actually draw the line that works effectively for you? And so I would say a couple of things. So number one, I everybody has different sensitivities around this, but given my personal experience having been laid off, I am very sensitive to the idea of the risk of too much concentration. Now, does that
mm,
mean that you miss some upside? Because like if it's a bull market,
mm.
literally metaphorically, of course you do well if you're concentrated in that area. That's true.
Exactly.
But if it
Mm,
turns like into a bear market, it can become a problem. And for me, the most important thing, it's not capturing every bit of upside, it's
mm,
preventing ruin. And so
mm.
I think a
Yeah.
little bit of
Yeah.
diversification is important. I
Mm,
would never say, oh, do 100 things, but for
mm,
me, the way that I think about it, first of all, it's important to recognize that as we diversify, it's not that you necessarily want to diversify into, so many different fields or
fields.
industries or
Mm,
whatever,
mm,
because that requires literally rebuilding new networks, new knowledge, whatever. If you're trying
mm,
to be a
mm,
dog breeder, a windsurfer, a fireman, a lawyer, like
mm,
that's all
mm,
so different. It would take you years to do it. But what I am talking
mm,
about is being thoughtful with your core intellectual property and saying, okay,
mm,
well, if I am, for instance, a leadership expert, what are the different ways that I could market that? What are the different ways that I could actually leverage it? And so maybe
mm,
some of it is one on one coaching. Maybe some of it
mm,
is online courses. Maybe some of it is giving speeches.
mm,
It's all the same core IP and core networks, but there's different ways you can monetize.
mm.
And if one of those things changes, like for instance, as we saw in the pandemic, corporate
Yeah.
speeches, that's not
Yeah.
a thing anymore when travel ends. You still
Mm,
have other ways that you can connect and other ways that you can earn revenue.
mm. Wow, thank you, thank you. I mean, while reading the long game, I picked on a word which is strategic patience, and that sort of resonated with me. I mean, when I read that, and this is what I would like to ask. So many people actually want instant or immediate gratification. So the question is, how long should one wait? How long? I mean,
Yes, you're right. That's the question for sure. The biggest problem that I identify when I was writing the long game really is, you know, eh, everybody pays lip service to being patient and to waiting. We all think it's a good idea, but the problem is that nobody wants to be a sucker, and nobody wants to, keep
yeah.
doing a thing too long when it is fruitless. And in that moment, right, when you're actually in the thick of it, trying to launch your company or trying to launch your new business or whatever it is almost impossible when you are in the thick of it to be able to tell the difference between something that is not working and something that is not working yet. And understanding how to parse that is one of the most central questions that we can answer for ourselves. So, what I will say, there's a few strategies that I would suggest that I hope can be helpful. The first is actually something that we can do up front, and it's something that a lot of people actually surprisingly fail to do. But of course, if you parse it, you realize it's not that surprising because we're human, right? We just want to dive into it, we want to get going. But
Hmm,
something that is really important is to actually take time up front to try to understand how, and make a guess, write it down. How long is this going to take? because we often have implicit assumptions in our mind about what it, oh, well, in 2 years I should be here. Well, is that actually accurate, or are you just kind of making that up, right? There's a story that I tell in the long game that comes from Jeff Bezos's 2018 letter to Amazon shareholders. And he tells the story about a friend of his that hired a handstand coach, of all things, for yoga. She wanted to get better at doing handstands. And the handstand coach said that if you ask the average person, how long does it take to be able to do a handstand in yoga? They would probably guess about 2 weeks of practice. But the truth is, it takes 6 months of daily
Wow.
practice. This is not like, oh, you're off by a little bit. This is that you're off literally by a factor of 12. The difference is 2 weeks versus 24 weeks. And if we think
24
about
weeks.
that in our own lives, we might think, oh, well, it's going to take me a year to get this business off the ground. Well, is it? Or is it going to take you 3 years? Is it going to take you 5 years? We don't know unless we ask and we parse it out. So typically for most things, aside from like whatever, space travel, there are other people who have accomplished in the past something similar to what you would like to do. And it is really important that we either seek those people out or at least do as much public information reading as we can to try to understand what their process looked like, so we can get a baseline and really begin to make sure whether our assumptions are accurate. Because it's fine to start a business that might take 5 years to get off the ground, but it is not fine if you think it's going to take a year and then you feel like a colossal failure when you're at 18 months and nothing's happened yet.
Yeah, I mean that's quite profound. So you must be able to watch, gauge the progress that you are making, and also be able to know when to call it quits and when to move on.
That's
Okay.
right.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. So, I mean, so let me ask this last question. And it goes to the young professionals because of the world that we are in right now. A lot of young professionals, there's this fear that, oh, if we get to the workplace, it's going to take a longer time to build that expertise. What advice would you give to someone, just to a young professional, or let's say a young graduate, just leaving school? What advice would you give to them on how to navigate the challenging terrain, the challenging economy that we are experiencing right now?
Well, it's certainly unsettling times that we live in. But I guess one piece of advice that I hope might be helpful for younger professionals is that if you are picking a field to gain expertise in, it's actually really useful to pick a field that is emerging, because meaning that the canon has not been settled yet. Because when you do, it means that no one has a competitive advantage over you. So, just by way of example, if you're choosing to become an expert in a field that has been around for a long time, I mean, let's say ancient Roman history, right? Like, the person who is 75 is going to know way more than you do about ancient Roman history, because they've had, 50 years to study it and to gain all of this knowledge that, is mostly not changing. And so you're always going to be at a strategic disadvantage. But if you're picking a field that is a more cutting edge field, like, we'll make it up, blockchain or something like that, that knowledge is being developed right now. A 75-year-old is not going to have a competitive advantage over you. The knowledge is coming out now. You are on an equal footing with them. And so it means that you have a much better chance of advancing more quickly, because you're starting at a level playing field regardless of your age.
How about senior executives as well? I mean, executives. What
Yes.
advice would you give? What, maybe two, three? What will you give to a senior executive?
Yeah. So if someone is a senior executive, you know, I've spent a lot of my career focused on these questions. So I, I definitely have clear opinions about this, but I think that I am very much a believer that we need to be proactive in our own careers, and we need to make sure that we do not put ourselves in a position where we are needlessly vulnerable. And things can change in an instant, and we have to be thinking about how do we build up our own career insurance. And this, of course, this matters for everyone, but it matters more for you if you are later in your career, because you've invested more in it. You've built up a reputation. You've probably built up a salary where you're making good money now. And so you are invested in the system and invested in the status quo. And therefore, if it changes, it really kind of puts you at systemic risk. And so the things that you can do to de-risk yourself, number one, would be building a strong personal brand for yourself, because it means that if you lose your job and you want to get hired for another one, it is a heck of a lot easier if people in your industry already know you, they like you, they respect you. The minute they discover that you're out on the open market, they're going to want to say, oh, well, let's snap him up. And the second thing you can do to de-risk your career is to work on creating multiple revenue streams for yourself. And this might sound complicated, but it literally could be things like, starting to just do some side consulting projects or some side coaching projects. Now, obviously, you need to make sure it doesn't conflict with any policies of your employer. But to the extent that you can do this, it gives you something that you can fall back on. I mean, in my book, Entrepreneurial You, I profile a guy named Pat Flynn who worked at an architecture firm, and
Yeah.
he got laid off. But the good news, I mean, this could have been devastating for him, but he had already started a side project where he was selling ebooks about how to pass a particular architecture exam. And within a few months, he had been making more money from the ebooks than he was from his day job. And so it was not a problem for him when he lost his job. And that's what I'd like for everybody, is to have just that kind of belt and suspenders situation where you have enough security so that if terrible things happen, it doesn't cause a trauma for you in your personal and your professional life.
So someone would say here that that works in the developed world, most especially in the America, I mean, in the US, in Canada, and all of that. That it may not work in Africa.
Well, it might not. I'm certainly not an expert in Africa, but what I can say is that in more developing economies, I actually think that typically people are more entrepreneurial. I mean, if you walk around India, let's say, or many other places, literally every person is selling stuff on the street. They could have no money whatsoever, and they're shining shoes, they're cooking chai on a burner, they're making samosas, they're doing all of these things because no one's handing them a job. What they realize is, if I'm going to earn money, if I'm going to feed my family, I have to make a job. I'm going to cook something up. And I think that entrepreneurial spirit is something that I respect very much. I think that actually in developed countries, people have gotten a little fat and happy, and they are used to being handed a job, and it comes as a very rude surprise to them because they feel like, oh, well, there was a deal. I was working in this job, and I was working hard, and I got my paycheck. And you get used
Exactly.
to it, you get addicted to it, and then all of a sudden, when you realize, oh, that contract, that was in your brain, that wasn't a literal contract, that could be broken at any time, they suddenly are stunned. So I think that actually in the developing world, oftentimes people have a much keener understanding of the fact that, you know what, all this stuff can go away in an instant. So you got to look out for yourself. You got to look out for your family. And when we do that, it keeps us sharp. It keeps us hungry.
Wow, that's amazing. That's amazing. That's amazing. I mean, I got there's a question someone sent to me here now. I mean, in my inbox, it says that Dorie, you've been one of the top LinkedIn top LinkedIn course creator. How did you go about it over the years? I mean, what have you done differently from your from your peers? I mean, that's the question this person is asking. That you've created a lot of courses. I mean, most of these courses are in demand. So how did you start? How, So that's the question this person is asking. I don't know if you
Ah,
have answer to that.
well, thank you. I can certainly try. So in a literal sense, I can answer the question two different ways. So in a literal sense, how I got connected with LinkedIn, going back to our previous conversation about the three pillars of becoming a recognized expert, your network is really crucial. And so the most important part about getting started, it was originally being connected with the opportunity. And that happened because I moved to New York a number of years ago from Boston. And when I was in New York, I came in and I really didn't have much of a network. I didn't have that many friends. And so I started co hosting dinners with a colleague of mine. And our plan was I would invite half the people and he would invite half the people, and our networks would cross pollinate. And as a result of that, he invited a woman who, as it happened, was an early instructor at LinkedIn. And, I didn't know anything about this. In fact, I'm not even sure it was called LinkedIn Learning then. I think it was still lynda.com. And she was nice enough to suggest me. She thought, oh, maybe you'd like this. And so I was like, okay, like I didn't know. But she connected me and it turned out to be a great opportunity, but it was something that arose from your network. So I think emphasizing that is really important. So that's number one in a literal sense about how I got the opportunity. And then secondly, I would say when it comes to the actual content of the courses, that for me, one of the most important things is I try to keep myself entertained when I'm recording the courses. I want it to be accessible. I hopefully want it to be fun for people. And that is an attitude of trying to blend education and fun. That I picked up when I was a college instructor. I now teach business school, but I used to teach undergraduates. And I literally just spent countless hours, hundreds and hundreds of hours teaching these undergrads. And sometimes it was in these hard circumstances. There was a class I taught at one college that ran every Monday night from 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. And I mean, to have 4 hours of teaching these college students, trying to keep them awake, trying to keep them engaged. Um, you sort of learn tricks to kind of practice getting people on the same page with you, and keeping it lively. And so I try to bring that to the LinkedIn Learning courses, because I know that oftentimes people are subjected, especially at work, to things that can be a little bit droning sometimes. And I wanted to try to do the opposite and hopefully keep it lively and keep it fun for them.
I mean, questions are coming in, but we may not be able to answer a lot of those questions. So maybe just last one. Someone is asking here that okay, someone says, so Dorie, what are you working on? What is that big thing that you are working on right now? Someone is asking which of your programs is the most profitable. That okay, that she sees that you have coaching program, you have recognized expert programs, and a quite number of that which one is the most profitable out of all? I mean, maybe we can just answer those two questions, then we're done.
All right. All right. Amazing. So what I am working on, the first question, literally actually just last night, I had a showcase, because one of the escapades that I talk about in my book, The Long Game, I talk a lot about the idea of creating 20% time for yourself, where you are just kind of carving out hopefully interesting side projects. And so for me, for the past several years, I've really invested a lot of my 20% time in writing musical theater. And so I actually had a showcase last night where, for the first time, one of my musicals, a 10-minute musical, was part of a live showcase with professional actors in New York. So that was very
Wow.
exciting. So I'm spending
Wow.
time honing my skills there. Thank you.
That's interesting.
It was very cool. It was very cool to get to see that. And
Oh,
then,
great.
to the question about what is most profitable that I do, I would say actually, I guess a little bit of a callback. In a literal sense, I think my LinkedIn Learning courses are probably among the most profitable things that I do now, because I feel fortunate. I've worked very intensively with them over the past 5 years. And so as a result, I've made about 25 courses for them, and they've also
Oh,
been
25
translated.
courses.
Yeah, it's a lot. And
Wow.
they've been translated also into multiple languages. And so I'm fortunate enough to be able to get royalties off of that as well. So I if you count both the original courses and the translations, I think they probably have something like I think it's 46 courses that I have done
Wow.
for them. So that has represented a fairly large percentage of revenue. And, I really treasure the relationship that I have with them.
The relationship. Wow. 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 Thank you so much. I mean, we can't, if we stay too long here, questions will just start rolling in and all of that. Oh wow, wow. Thank you so much, Dorie. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. I mean, I'm so grateful for having you on this show. And I know that anytime I also want to come back to you to probably invite you for a physical show. I mean, maybe one day we'll do a collabo together sometimes.
That would be great. That would be great. Adedoyin, it's
Yeah.
been a pleasure speaking with you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. Thank you, listeners. That's the end of episode 13 of the Performance Tools LinkedIn Live. Catch you some other times. Thank you for your time. Thank you. Thank you.